The golden autumn leaves danced outside the windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his study, staring at the guest list that would change everything. It was October 2004, and his engagement to Camilla Parker Bowles had just been announced to the world. What the public didn't know was the storm brewing behind palace doors. Camilla's daughter Laura and son Tom had been part of Charles's life for years, quietly attending family gatherings and building relationships with William and Harry. They had grown close to the future king, sharing jokes at dinner parties and joining him for countryside walks. Charles had come to see them as his own children, appreciating their down-to-earth nature and genuine affection. But tradition is a heavy crown, and the palace machinery had different plans. Sir Michael Peet, Charles's private secretary, knocked gently before entering the study. His face carried the weight of difficult conversations. "Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss the wedding arrangements," he said, placing a revised guest list on the mahogany desk. Charles glanced down and felt his heart sink. Laura and Tom's names had been crossed out in red ink. "This is unacceptable," Charles said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of royal training. "They are family now. Camilla's children must be included." Sir Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the Queen's private secretary has made it quite clear. This is to be a small, intimate ceremony focusing on the immediate royal family. Including Mrs. Parker Bowles's children would set a precedent and complicate the guest list significantly." The truth behind those diplomatic words was harsher. The royal establishment still viewed Charles's relationship with Camilla as controversial. Diana's death in 1997 had left deep scars in public opinion, and many still blamed Camilla for the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. Adding her children to the wedding would be seen as another step too far. Charles stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the gardens where he and Camilla often took their morning coffee. "These are not just any children, Michael. They are my future stepchildren. Tom served our country in the military. Laura has been nothing but respectful and supportive. How can we exclude them from what should be a celebration of family unity?" The private secretary's silence spoke volumes. This decision had come from the very top of the royal hierarchy. Camilla entered the room at that moment, her intuition telling her something was wrong. She had perfected the art of reading Charles's moods over their decades of relationship. The tension in his shoulders and the way he gripped the window frame told her everything she needed to know. "What's happened?" she asked softly. Charles turned to face the woman he had loved for over 30 years. Her strength had carried them through the darkest periods of public scrutiny, death threats, and royal disapproval. How could he tell her that even now, on what should be their happiest moment, the palace was still trying to diminish their love? "The guest list has been revised," he said carefully. Camilla walked over and picked up the paper from his desk. Her face remained composed, but Charles could see the hurt flash in her eyes as she saw her children's names crossed out. Years of palace protocol had taught her to hide her emotions, but this cut deep. "I see," she said quietly. "And there's no room for negotiation?" Sir Michael cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the concerns are about public perception and media coverage. The ceremony is already under intense scrutiny. Adding more controversial elements could." "Controversial?" Camilla's voice carried a steel that few people ever heard. "My children are controversial? Tom, who served 3 tours of duty and never spoke to the press about our family? Laura, who has raised 2 beautiful children and supported numerous charities quietly, without seeking publicity." The room fell silent. Outside, a gardener was raking leaves, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the house that would soon be his workplace's most famous residence home. Charles moved to stand beside Camilla, a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than words. "Michael, please convey to Her Majesty's office that this is not acceptable to me. If we are to marry, it must be as a complete family. That includes Tom and Laura." The private secretary nodded, but his expression suggested this battle was already lost. "I'll communicate your wishes, sir. But I must warn you that the decision may not be reversible at this stage." After Michael left, Charles and Camilla sat together in the sitting room where they had planned so many aspects of their future. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill that had settled over their joy. "Perhaps they're right," Camilla said finally. "Perhaps it's better if Tom and Laura aren't subjected to all that media attention. You know how brutal they can be." Charles took her hand. "This isn't about protecting them from the media, darling. This is about the palace still trying to control our narrative, to make our marriage fit into their comfortable boxes." The next few days brought a series of tense phone calls and meetings. Charles reached out to his sons, hoping for their support. William, now 22 and studying at university, listened carefully to his father's explanation. "Dad, I think you're right," William said during their private conversation. "If you're marrying Camilla, then her children are becoming part of our family. It seems wrong to exclude them from the wedding." Harry, 19 and still finding his way in the world, was more direct. "It's complete rubbish, Pa Tom's sound, and Laura's always been kind to us. If they can't come to the wedding, what message does that send?" Armed with his son's support, Charles felt emboldened to push back harder against the palace machinery. He called a meeting with the Queen's private secretary, determined to make his case directly. The meeting took place at Buckingham Palace, in one of the smaller reception rooms overlooking the gardens. Charles had been in this room countless times for various royal business, but today felt different. Today, he was fighting for his future family's dignity. "Sir Robin," Charles began, addressing the Queen's private secretary, "I want to understand exactly why my future stepchildren cannot attend my wedding." Sir Robin Jamvrin was a skilled diplomat, but even he seemed uncomfortable with this conversation. "Your Royal Highness, the decision reflects concerns about the scale of the event, media management, and public perception. The wedding is meant to be a quiet, dignified affair, and including two well-behaved, accomplished young adults would somehow undermine that dignity," Charles pressed. The real answer, which couldn't be spoken aloud, was that the royal establishment was still trying to minimize Camilla's presence in royal life. Every accommodation felt like a victory for the woman they had once hoped would simply disappear. Including her children would make her integration into the royal family too complete, too permanent. "There are also practical considerations," Sir Robin continued. "Security arrangements, seating protocols, media positioning." Charles interrupted. "These are excuses, not reasons. We both know that if the palace wants to accommodate additional guests, it can be arranged in a matter of hours." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but Charles could see that minds had already been made up. The wedding would proceed without Tom and Laura Parker Bowles, and no amount of arguing would change that decision. When Charles returned to Clarence House, he found Camilla in the garden, tending to the roses they had planted together. Gardening had always been her refuge during difficult times. "How did it go?" she asked, though his expression had already given her the answer. "I'm sorry, my darling. They won't budge." Camilla straightened up, brushing the soil from her hands. "Then, we have a choice to make." Charles looked at her questioningly. "We can accept this and let them dictate how we begin our married life," she continued. "Or we can find another way to show that we're a united family." That evening, they sat down with Tom and Laura to explain the situation. Both young adults took the news with grace, though the hurt was evident in their eyes. "It's all right, Mummy," Laura said, using the childhood name that always made Camilla smile. "We understand. This is about you and Charles, not us." Tom nodded in agreement. "We'll be there in spirit. And there will be plenty of celebrations afterward where we can all be together properly." But Charles wasn't satisfied with this gracious acceptance. That night, as he lay in bed planning the remainder of the wedding preparations, an idea began to form. If the palace insisted on excluding Tom and Laura from the ceremony, he would find ways to include them in every other aspect possible. The next morning, he called his wedding planner. "I want to arrange a private family dinner the night before the ceremony," he said. "Something intimate, just for our closest family members." This dinner would become legendary among those who attended. Held at Highgrove House, Charles's beloved country estate, it brought together the two families that were about to become one. Tom and Laura were not just included, but were treated as the guests of honor. Charles stood to make a toast that night, looking around the table at William, Harry, Tom, Laura, and Camilla. "Tomorrow, Camilla and I will make our vows in front of a small group of people," he said. "But tonight, we celebrate with the people who matter most, our children." The evening was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of warmth that Charles had always hoped to bring to royal life. Tom regaled the table with tales from his army service, while Laura shared amusing anecdotes about her children's latest adventures. William and Harry seemed completely at ease with their soon-to-be step-siblings, and the conversation flowed naturally between all the young adults. But even this gesture couldn't completely heal the wound of exclusion from the main event. As the wedding day approached, Charles found himself increasingly frustrated with the palace's rigid approach. Every detail seemed designed to minimize the significance of his marriage to Camilla, From the decision to hold the ceremony at Windsor Guildhall rather than a church, to the limited guest list, to the exclusion of her children. The morning of April 9th, 2005, dawned bright and clear. As Charles prepared for his wedding day, he received a surprise visit from Tom and Laura. They had come to wish him well and to present him with a gift, a vintage photograph of him and Camilla from the early days of their relationship, beautifully framed. "We wanted you to know that we're proud to be joining your family," Tom said formally. "And we're grateful for how you've welcomed us over the years." Charles was deeply moved by this gesture. Here were young people showing more grace and maturity than the entire royal establishment. "You are already part of this family," he told them. "Today's ceremony is just a formality. What matters is what we've built together over these past years." As his car pulled away from Clarence House toward Windsor, Charles reflected on the morning's events. The palace had succeeded in excluding Tom and Laura from the ceremony, but they had failed to break the bonds of the blended family that was forming. The wedding itself was beautiful, but bittersweet. As Charles and Camilla exchanged vows, he couldn't help but notice the empty spaces where her children should have been sitting. The photographs would show a happy couple surrounded by royal family and close friends, but they would also serve as a permanent reminder of who was deliberately left out. Camilla, for her part, maintained her composure throughout the ceremony, but those who knew her well could see the sadness in her eyes during certain moments. When she looked toward where her children should have been sitting, the pain was briefly visible before she composed herself again. The reception afterward was held at Windsor Castle, and here too, Tom and Laura's absence was felt. Other family members asked about them, surprised not to see them among the guests. The official explanation was that the couple wanted to keep the celebration small and intimate, but many guests saw through this diplomatic language. As the day drew to a close, Charles and Camilla returned to Clarence House as husband and wife. They had achieved their dream of marrying after decades of obstacles, but the victory felt incomplete. The newspapers the next day focused on Camilla's transformation from royal mistress to royal wife, on the crowds of well-wishers outside Windsor Guildhall, and on the fashion choices of the guests. But they missed the real story, the first major battle of wills between Charles and the palace establishment over his new family, and how that battle had ended in compromise that satisfied no one completely. That evening, as they sat together in their home, now officially husband and wife, Camilla finally allowed herself to express her true feelings. "I know they were trying to protect the monarchy," she said quietly. "But it hurt, Charles. It really hurt to have my children excluded from what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives." Charles pulled her close. "This won't happen again," he promised. "From now on, we're a family unit, and we'll be treated as such." It was a promise that would be tested many times in the years to come, as the palace struggled to adjust to the new reality of Charles's marriage and the presence of Camilla's children in royal life. But on that night, as they planned their future together, both Charles and Camilla were determined that their love and their blended family would ultimately triumph over the rigid traditions that had tried to keep them apart. The silence that would follow this first rejection would indeed change everything, setting the stage for a series of conflicts between Charles's vision of a modern, inclusive royal family and the palace establishment's preference for maintaining traditional boundaries. The wedding day had been won, but the war for acceptance was just beginning. The weeks following the royal wedding brought an unexpected calm to Clarence House. But beneath the surface, tensions were building that would reshape the monarchy forever. Charles and Camilla had settled into married life with remarkable ease, their decades-long relationship finally legitimized. But the palace machinery was struggling to accept the new reality. Queen Elizabeth II sat in her private study at Buckingham Palace, reviewing the morning papers with her usual cup of Earl Grey tea. The wedding coverage had been largely positive, much to everyone's relief, but she was more concerned with the reports filtering up through her staff about Charles's growing assertiveness regarding his new family dynamics. Her private secretary, Sir Robin Janvrin, knocked softly before entering with the day's briefing folder. "Your Majesty, we have some matters to discuss regarding the Prince of Wales and his household arrangements." The Queen set down her teacup with the precision that had characterized her 73 years of life. "What sort of matters, Robin?" "It appears His Royal Highness is pushing to include Mrs. Parker Bowles's children in various official functions. He's requested they be invited to the upcoming Order of the Garter ceremony, and there have been inquiries about including them in the Trooping the Color balcony appearance." The Queen's expression remained neutral, but those who had worked with her for decades could recognize the subtle signs of her displeasure. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way she aligned her papers with unnecessary precision. These were the tells of a monarch who was not pleased with what she was hearing. I see. And what is your assessment of these requests? Sir Robin had been dreading this conversation. He understood the delicate balance required in managing the royal family's various personalities and demands, but Charles's recent marriage had introduced complications that no one had fully anticipated. Ma'am, the inclusion of non-royal family members in these ceremonial events would be unprecedented. The Order of the Garter ceremony, in particular, has very strict protocols about attendance. Even royal children are only included once they reach a certain age and position in the succession. The Queen rose from her desk and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Below, tourists pressed against the gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of royal life. She wondered what they would think if they knew about the complex family dynamics playing out behind these historic walls. What do we know about these young people? She asked, still looking out at the gardens. Tom Parker Bowles is 30 years old, served in the army, and works as a food writer. Laura Parker Bowles is 27, married to Harry Lopez, and has 2 young children. Both have remained largely out of the public eye and have never spoken to the media about their mother's relationship with the prince. And their relationship with William and Harry? This was the question Sir Robin had hoped to avoid. By all accounts, ma'am, they get along very well. Prince William has been seen socializing with them on several occasions, and Prince Harry appears to consider them friends rather than just step-siblings. The Queen turned back to her desk, her mind working through the implications. The integration of Camilla into the royal family had been challenging enough, but at least she was now the Prince of Wales's wife, and therefore had a clear position in the hierarchy. Her children occupied a much more ambiguous space. Has the Prince of Wales discussed these matters with me directly? She asked. Not yet, Your Majesty, but I believe he intends to request an audience with you this week. The Queen nodded slowly. She had been expecting this confrontation since the wedding. Charles had shown remarkable restraint in accepting the limitations placed on his wedding guest list, but she knew her eldest son well enough to understand that his silence didn't indicate acceptance. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Charles was indeed preparing for what he knew would be a difficult conversation with his mother. He had spent the morning in his garden, a practice that always helped him organize his thoughts before challenging discussions. Camilla found him there, pruning roses with perhaps more vigor than the delicate flowers required. You're going to decapitate those poor plants if you keep attacking them like that, she said gently. Charles looked up, realizing he had been taking his frustration out on the gardening. Sorry, darling. I was thinking about my conversation with Mama this afternoon. About the children? Among other things. Charles set down his pruning shears and looked at his wife. Camilla, I need to know that you're prepared for this fight. It's going to get uncomfortable, and there may be consequences. Camilla had been thinking about this conversation for weeks. She understood the royal hierarchy better than most people, having observed it from the outside for so many years. But she also knew that Charles's relationship with his mother was complex, built on decades of duty, respect, and, occasionally, frustration. Charles, I never want to be the cause of conflict between you and your family, she said carefully. If it's easier to keep Tom and Laura separate from royal functions. No. Charles's response was immediate and firm. We've already compromised too much. I won't have a marriage where part of my family is kept hidden away like some shameful secret. The determination in his voice reminded Camilla of why she had fallen in love with him decades earlier. Beneath the royal protocol and public duty was a man of deep convictions who fought for what he believed was right, even when it was difficult. That afternoon, Charles made his way through the familiar corridors of Buckingham Palace to his mother's private apartments. He had walked these halls thousands of times over his 56 years, but today felt different. Today, he was coming not just as a son, but as a husband fighting for his new family's place in the monarchy. The Queen received him in her sitting room, the same room where they had discussed his divorce from Diana, his relationship with Camilla, and countless other family matters over the years. But the dynamic had shifted slightly since his marriage. Charles was no longer just the heir asking for permission. He was a married man expecting his family to be treated with appropriate respect. Charles, congratulations again on your wedding, the Queen began. The ceremony was beautifully done, and the public reaction has been more positive than we dared hope. Thank you, Mama. Camilla and I are very happy. Charles paused, knowing he needed to choose his words carefully. However, there are some matters we need to discuss regarding our family arrangements going forward. The Queen gestured for him to continue, though her expression suggested she knew exactly what was coming. I want Tom and Laura to be included in appropriate royal functions. They are my stepchildren now, and I believe they deserve recognition as such. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of royal tradition and protocol. The Queen had spent her entire reign carefully managing the public image of the monarchy, understanding that every decision would be scrutinized and could potentially damage the institution she had devoted her life to protecting. Charles, you must understand that the inclusion of non-royal family members in state ceremonies would set a precedent that could have far-reaching consequences. What happens when other royals marry and want their new family members included? Where do we draw the lines? Charles had anticipated this argument. Mama, we're not talking about distant relatives or casual connections. These are my stepchildren, young people who have been part of my life for years and who have conducted themselves with complete discretion and dignity. But they are not royal, Charles. They have no titles, no official position in the succession, no constitutional role. Their inclusion would confuse the public about who exactly constitutes the royal family. The conversation continued for over an hour, with both sides presenting their arguments with the careful diplomacy that had characterized their relationship for decades. But beneath the polite language was a fundamental disagreement about the future direction of the monarchy. Charles believed the royal family needed to modernize and become more inclusive, reflecting the reality of contemporary British families. The Queen, shaped by decades of managing constitutional crises and public scandals, believed that maintaining clear boundaries was essential for the monarchy's survival. I'm not asking for Tom and Laura to be given titles or official roles, Charles said finally. I'm simply asking that they be treated as family members at appropriate occasions. Surely there's room for some flexibility within our traditions. The Queen considered her response carefully. She could see the determination in her son's eyes, the same stubbornness that had carried him through the difficult years of public criticism over his relationship with Camilla. But she also knew that every accommodation they made would be seen as a victory by those who wanted to fundamentally transform the monarchy. Let me consider the matter, she said finally. But I want you to understand that any decisions we make will need the agreement of the palace staff, the government, and careful consideration of public opinion. Charles recognized this as a diplomatic way of saying no, but he also understood that his mother rarely made definitive statements without careful consideration. He had planted the seed. Now he needed to be patient while it grew. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet but intense negotiations behind palace doors. Charles met with various palace officials, building his case for including Tom and Laura in family functions. He emphasized their military service, their charitable work, and their complete discretion in handling media attention. Camilla, meanwhile, found herself in an increasingly difficult position. Her children were aware of the discussions about their role in royal life, and both Tom and Laura expressed mixed feelings about the situation. Honestly, Mummy, I'm not sure I want to be part of all that royal circus, Tom confided during a private lunch at Clarence's house. I've got my own career, my own life. Do I really need to be standing on balconies waving at crowds? Laura shared similar concerns. I worry about the children, she said, referring to her young daughter and son. If we become more involved in royal life, they'll grow up in the spotlight. Is that fair to them? These conversations forced Camilla to examine her own motivations. Was she pushing for her children's inclusion because it was right for them, or because she wanted validation that her family was truly accepted by the monarchy? The answer came during a particularly difficult week when Tom was approached by a tabloid newspaper offering significant money for an exclusive interview about life in the royal family. He immediately contacted Camilla to report the approach and to assure her that he would never consider such a thing. That's when I knew, Camilla later told Charles. My children don't want to be famous or make money from royal connections. They just want to be included in our family celebrations like normal stepchildren would be. This incident actually worked in their favor, as palace officials were impressed by Tom's immediate rejection of the media offer and his proper handling of the approach. It demonstrated the discretion and loyalty that the royal family valued above all other qualities. Gradually, small accommodations began to be made. Tom and Laura were invited to Charles's private birthday celebration at Highgrove, an event that included other royal family members. They attended the informal drinks reception before Princess Anne's birthday dinner. These were careful steps, allowing the palace to test public reaction while giving Charles and Camilla's small victories. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Prince Philip. Charles's father had watched the family dynamics with his characteristic blend of practical observation and sometimes brutal honesty. During a private conversation with the Queen, Philip offered his perspective. Elizabeth, these young people have handled themselves well. They're not seeking publicity, they're not causing problems, and Charles is clearly committed to them. Perhaps it's time to stop treating them like some sort of contagious disease. Prince Philip's support carried significant weight with the Queen. He had always been her closest advisor on family matters, and his instincts about people were generally sound. If he believed Tom and Laura could be trusted with greater inclusion in royal life, perhaps it was worth reconsidering the palace's position. The Queen's change of heart came gradually, expressed through small gestures rather than dramatic announcements. Tom and Laura were invited to attend a pre-Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace, a tradition that included extended royal family members and close friends. They were included in the guest list for Camilla's birthday celebration, hosted by the Queen herself. These invitations sent a clear signal throughout the palace hierarchy that Tom and Laura were to be treated as legitimate members of Charles's family circle. The protocol officers began including them in certain planning documents, and the security team was briefed on their protection requirements for royal events. But perhaps the most significant moment came during a quiet conversation between the Queen and Camilla. They had developed a respectful relationship over the years since Charles's divorce, built on their shared commitment to supporting him and their mutual understanding of the pressures of royal life. "I want you to know that I appreciate how your children have conducted themselves," the Queen told Camilla during a private tea at Balmoral. "They clearly understand the responsibilities that come with being connected to this family, and they've shown remarkable discretion." Camilla was deeply moved by this acknowledgement. "They're good young people, Your Majesty. They love Charles, and they respect the institution. They just want to be part of our family." "I believe that's possible," the Queen replied carefully. "Within appropriate boundaries, of course." It was not the full acceptance that Charles had hoped for, but it was progress. The royal family was slowly adapting to accommodate its newest members, finding ways to include Tom and Laura while maintaining the traditions and protocols that had guided the monarchy for centuries. The changes were subtle but significant. Palace Christmas cards began including Tom and Laura in some family photographs. They were invited to join shooting parties at Sandringham, a traditional royal pastime that indicated genuine acceptance into the family circle. Most importantly, they were treated with warmth and respect by other royal family members, particularly William and Harry, who had genuinely embraced them as step-siblings. But the battles over protocol and inclusion had revealed deeper tensions within the royal family about its future direction. Charles's insistence on fighting for his stepchildren's recognition was seen by some as the first shot in a larger war about modernizing the monarchy. Palace officials worried about where these changes might lead and whether the institution's careful traditions could survive the pressure for reform. As the first year of Charles and Camilla's marriage drew to a close, both sides could claim partial victory. Charles had succeeded in securing greater recognition for his stepchildren, while the palace had maintained control over the pace and extent of their integration into royal life. But everyone involved understood that this was just the beginning. The silence that had followed the initial rejection of Tom and Laura from the wedding had indeed begun to change the palace forever, opening discussions about inclusion, modernization, and the future shape of the British royal family that would continue for years to come. The fragile peace that had settled over the royal family following Charles and Camilla's wedding was shattered on a cold February morning in 2006. Charles stood in his study at Clarence House, holding a letter that would force him to make the most difficult decision of his royal career. The letter was from the Lord Chamberlain's office, informing him that Tom and Laura Parker Bowles would not be included in the official photographs for the Queen's upcoming 80th birthday celebrations. More than that, they were specifically requested not to attend the family gathering at Windsor Castle that would precede the public celebrations. "They're doing it again," Charles said to Camilla, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every time we think we've made progress, they find new ways to exclude your children." Camilla took the letter from his hands, reading the formal language that politely but firmly relegated her children to the margins of royal life once again. After nearly a year of marriage, after all the careful negotiations and small victories, they were back to being treated as unwelcome outsiders. "Perhaps it's for the best," she said quietly, though the hurt in her voice was unmistakable. The Queen's birthday should be about her, not about our family politics. No, Camilla. This is exactly the wrong approach. Charles moved to the window, looking out at the London street where photographers often waited for glimpses of their life. We can't keep accepting these exclusions as if they're normal. We can't keep pretending that your children don't exist every time there's an important royal event. The truth was that the past year had been a series of small humiliations disguised as protocol decisions. Tom and Laura had been excluded from the state banquet for the French president, told that space was limited to working royals only. They had been left off the guest list for Princess Anne's wedding anniversary celebration, with officials citing the need to keep the event intimate. Each exclusion came with reasonable explanations that couldn't be argued against without seeming petty. But Charles could see the pattern. The palace establishment was conducting a systematic campaign to keep his stepchildren at arm's length from royal life, hoping that eventually they would simply fade into the background as minor relatives often did. "I'm going to see Mama," Charles announced suddenly. "This has gone far enough." Camilla looked up from the letter, alarm in her eyes. "Charles, please think about this carefully. You can't go to war with the palace every time Tom and Laura are excluded from something." "Why not?" Charles's response surprised them both with its vehemence. "They're my family now. Our family. If I don't stand up for them, who will?" That afternoon's meeting with the Queen was unlike any previous conversation between mother and son. Charles arrived at Buckingham Palace with a determination that palace staff immediately recognized as dangerous. When the Prince of Wales was truly angry about something, everyone in the building could sense the electricity in the air. The Queen received him in her private sitting room, the same space where they had discussed his stepchildren's role the previous year. But the atmosphere today was completely different. Gone was the careful diplomacy and mutual respect that usually characterized their meetings. "Mama, I want to discuss this pattern of excluding Tom and Laura from family events," Charles began without preamble. The Queen set down her reading glasses and gave her son the kind of look that had quelled generations of royal rebellion. "Charles, we've been through this. There are protocols and traditions that must be maintained." "Protocols?" Charles's voice rose slightly, a rare display of emotion in his mother's presence. "What protocols dictate that my stepchildren should be treated like pariahs at family gatherings?" "They are not being treated like pariahs. They are being treated according to their position, which is as private citizens with no official role in the royal family." The conversation that followed would be recounted in various versions by palace staff for years afterward. Voices were raised, old grievances were aired, and fundamental disagreements about the future of the monarchy came spilling out. Charles argued that the royal family needed to reflect modern British society, where blended families were increasingly common. The Queen countered that the monarchy's strength came from its consistency and tradition, not from adapting to every social trend. "You're asking me to choose between my family and my duty to the crown," Charles said at one point. "That's an impossible position to put me in. I'm asking you to understand that your duty to the crown must come first," the Queen replied firmly. "That has always been the burden of our position." The meeting ended without resolution, with both sides more entrenched in their positions than ever before. Charles left Buckingham Palace knowing that he faced a choice that would define not just his marriage, but his entire approach to being heir to the throne. That evening, he called an emergency family meeting at Clarence House. William and Harry arrived within the hour, both sensing that something significant was happening in their father's household. "I need you both to understand what's happening," Charles told his sons as they sat in the drawing room, where they had shared so many family conversations over the years. "Your grandmother and the palace are systematically excluding Tom and Laura from royal life. They're trying to pretend that Camilla's children don't exist." William, now 23 and increasingly involved in royal duties, understood the implications immediately. "What are you going to do about it, Pa?" "I'm considering making a public statement about it. I think it's time for the palace to explain why my stepchildren are being treated differently from other royal family members." Harry looked alarmed. "Dad, you can't go public with this. It'll be a disaster. The media will have a field day." Charles appreciated his youngest son's concern, but his mind was made up. "Harry, sometimes you have to take a stand for what's right, even if it's difficult. Tom and Laura have been nothing but respectful and discreet. They don't deserve this treatment." The conversation continued late into the evening, with both princes trying to find a middle path that might satisfy their father without creating a constitutional crisis. But Charles had reached the point where compromise felt like betrayal. The breaking point came 3 days later during a seemingly routine event. Charles and Camilla were attending a charity gala for one of his environmental organizations, a cause close to his heart that had brought together supporters from across British society. During the reception, Charles was approached by Sir David Manning, a distinguished diplomat who had worked with the royal family for years. Sir David mentioned how impressed he had been with Tom Parker Bowles's recent article about sustainable farming practices, and he asked whether Tom might be interested in joining one of Charles's environmental initiatives. "I'd love to include him," Charles replied. "But apparently the palace doesn't think my stepchildren are suitable for royal patronage work." The bitterness in Charles's voice was unmistakable, and several nearby guests couldn't help but overhear the comment. By the next morning, gossip about the Prince of Wales's frustration with palace protocol was circulating through London's social circles. When Sir Robin Jamvern called Charles that afternoon to discuss the unhelpful comments that had been reported back to the palace, Charles's patience finally snapped completely. "Robin, I'm tired of pretending that everything is fine when it's not. My stepchildren are being treated shamefully, and I won't stand for it any longer. Sir, surely we can discuss this privately without involving the public?" Private discussions haven't worked. We've been having private discussions for over a year, and nothing has changed. Maybe it's time for some public accountability. That evening, Charles called his authorized biography writer and longtime friend, Jonathan Dimbleby. What he said during that conversation would later be described as the most explosive royal interview since Diana's Panorama appearance. Charles didn't attack his mother directly, but he made his feelings about palace protocol abundantly clear. He spoke about the pain of watching his stepchildren being excluded from family events, about the frustration of having his attempts at modernization blocked at every turn, and about his vision for a more inclusive royal family. "The monarchy must evolve with the times," Charles said during the interview. "We can't continue to operate as if blended families and step relationships are somehow inappropriate or shameful. These are realities of modern life, and the royal family should reflect that." When asked directly about Tom and Laura's exclusion from royal events, Charles was carefully diplomatic but unmistakably critical of the palace's approach. "My stepchildren are wonderful young people who have conducted themselves with complete dignity and discretion. Any suggestion that they are somehow unfit for royal occasions is both hurtful and wrong." The interview wouldn't be published for several weeks, but word of its contents spread quickly through palace circles. The Queen was informed of Charles's comments within hours, and the reaction was immediate and severe. Charles was summoned to an emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace the next morning. This time, he was joined not just by the Queen, but by Prince Philip, Princess Anne, and several senior palace officials. It was the royal equivalent of a full court-martial. "Charles, what you've done is completely unacceptable," the Queen began without preamble. "You cannot use the media to fight family disputes." Prince Philip was more direct. "You're behaving like a petulant child who can't get his own way. This is exactly the kind of behavior that damages the monarchy." But Charles was past caring about diplomatic niceties. "What damages the monarchy is pretending that we live in the 1950s. What damages the monarchy is treating decent people badly because they don't fit into some outdated idea of who qualifies as family." Princess Anne, who had generally stayed out of the family politics surrounding Charles's marriage, finally spoke up. "Charles, I understand your frustration, but there are ways to handle these issues without creating a public spectacle." "Are there, Anne? Because I've been trying the quiet way for over a year, and nothing has changed. Tom and Laura are still being excluded from events where they should naturally be included." The meeting went on for nearly 3 hours, with various family members and officials trying to find a way to contain the damage from Charles's interview. But the fundamental disagreement remained unresolved. The Queen made one final attempt at compromise. "Charles, if we agree to include Tom and Laura in more private family gatherings, will you consider withdrawing the interview?" Charles looked around the room at the faces of people he had known his entire life, people who had guided the monarchy through decades of change and challenge. He understood their concerns about maintaining tradition and avoiding scandal. But he also knew that some principles were worth fighting for. "Mama, I can't withdraw the interview. Too much has been said, and too much needs to change. Tom and Laura deserve better than to be treated as second-class members of our family." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room understood that a line had been crossed, that the relationship between Charles and the palace establishment had fundamentally changed. When the interview was finally published, the reaction was immediate and intense. Some commentators praised Charles for trying to modernize the royal family and for standing up for his stepchildren. Others criticized him for airing family disputes in public and potentially damaging the monarchy's reputation. But perhaps the most significant reaction came from Tom and Laura themselves. In a joint statement released through their lawyers, they expressed their love and support for both Charles and Camilla while asking for privacy and understanding from the media. "We are proud to be part of the Prince of Wales's family," their statement read. "We have never sought publicity or special treatment, and we hope that the focus can return to the important work that the royal family does on behalf of the country." The dignity and restraint of their response actually strengthened Charles's position, demonstrating exactly the kind of character that he had been arguing made them worthy of inclusion in royal life. The immediate aftermath of the interview was chaotic. Palace officials worked around the clock to manage the media response, while family members struggled to process the implications of Charles's very public challenge to royal protocol. But, gradually, changes began to emerge from the crisis. The Queen, recognizing that the situation had become untenable, authorized a review of protocols governing extended family members at royal events. Palace officials were instructed to find ways to include Tom and Laura in appropriate occasions without compromising the dignity of state ceremonies. The breaking point had been reached, and everyone involved understood that there was no going back to the old way of doing things. Charles's willingness to fight publicly for his stepchildren had forced the royal family to confront questions about tradition, inclusion, and the future direction of the monarchy that could no longer be avoided. As the dust settled from the crisis, Charles and Camilla reflected on what they had achieved and what it had cost them. They had won greater recognition for Tom and Laura, but at the price of creating lasting tensions within the royal family. Was it worth it? Camilla asked one evening as they sat in their garden at Highgrove, watching the sunset over the countryside that had always provided them with peace. Charles considered the question carefully. "Ask me again in 10 years, he said finally. "But I think our grandchildren will be grateful that we fought this battle now, so they won't have to fight it later." The silence that had followed the initial rejection of Tom and Laura from the royal wedding had indeed changed the palace forever. But it had taken a very public crisis to force those changes into the open, setting the stage for even more dramatic confrontations in the years to come. The aftermath of Charles's explosive interview created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate royal family. By the summer of 2006, what had begun as a dispute over wedding guest lists had evolved into a fundamental challenge to centuries of royal protocol. The palace found itself facing something unprecedented: open rebellion from the heir to the throne. Charles's decision to speak publicly about his stepchildren's treatment had emboldened other members of the royal family to question long-standing traditions. Princess Anne, who had initially criticized her brother's public stance, began privately supporting some of his arguments about modernization. Prince Edward and his wife Sophie found themselves reconsidering their own children's future roles in the monarchy. Even the traditionally conservative Duke of Gloucester expressed sympathy for Charles's position during a private family gathering. The Queen Mother's former lady-in-waiting, Lady Susan Hussey, captured the mood perfectly during a conversation with friends. "It's as if Prince Charles has opened a door that no one realized was locked, and now everyone is rushing through it." But it was Prince Philip who provided the most surprising support for his eldest son's rebellion. During a family dinner at Balmoral in August 2006, Philip addressed the elephant in the room with his characteristic directness. "You know, Elizabeth," he said to the Queen while the extended family listened in fascinated silence, "Charles might have a point about all this protocol nonsense. We've been so busy protecting traditions that we've forgotten why most of them existed in the first place." The Queen's response was measured but telling. "Philip, some traditions exist because they work, not because they're old. And some traditions exist because no one has had the courage to question them," Charles interjected, earning surprised looks from around the dinner table. It was Prince William who changed the tone of the conversation. Now 24 and increasingly confident in his royal role, he had been watching his father struggle with growing concern and admiration. "Granny," William said, using the familiar name that always softened the Queen's demeanor, "I think Pa is right about Tom and Laura. They're good people, and they make him happy. Isn't that what families are supposed to do? Support each other?" The simplicity of William's observation cut through months of complex protocol discussions and constitutional concerns. Here was the future king, speaking from the heart about what he valued in family relationships. "Harry," never one to be outdone by his older brother, added his own perspective. Besides, Granny, Tom tells the best stories about his army days, and Laura makes brilliant chocolate cake. Surely that counts for something in the royal qualifications department. The gentle humor in Harry's comment broke some of the tension that had been building around these discussions for months. Even the Queen smiled slightly at her younger grandson's assessment of his step-aunt's domestic skills. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Princess Margaret's daughter, Lady Sarah Chatto, had been quietly observing the family dynamics with the artistic eye that had shaped her career as a painter. "Aunt Lillibut," she said, using the family nickname that few people were permitted to use with the Queen, "I've been thinking about what this really means for all of us. If we don't find ways to include the people our family members love, we risk losing the family members themselves." The weight of this observation settled over the dinner table. Everyone present understood that Lady Sarah was talking about more than just Charles and Camilla. She was addressing the broader question of how the royal family could maintain its unity while adapting to changing social realities. The Queen's response came slowly, as if she were working through decades of constitutional training to arrive at a conclusion that surprised even herself. "Perhaps," she said finally, "it's time for us to consider what inclusion really means, and how we can achieve it without compromising the essential dignity of the crown." This dinner conversation would later be remembered as the moment when the royal family began to genuinely grapple with modernization rather than simply resisting it. But translating this philosophical shift into practical changes would prove more challenging than anyone anticipated. The first test came just 2 weeks later when Zara Phillips, Princess Anne's daughter, announced her engagement to rugby player Mike Tyndall. The wedding planning immediately raised questions about guest lists, protocol, and family inclusion that echoed the debates surrounding Charles and Camilla's marriage. But this time, Charles seized the opportunity to demonstrate his vision of inclusive royal celebrations. He privately approached Zara with a proposal that would set new precedents for royal weddings. "Zara," he said during a private conversation at Gatcombe Park, "I want your wedding to be everything that mine couldn't be. I want you to invite everyone who matters to you, and Mike, regardless of their royal status or lack thereof." Zara, who had always been one of Charles's favorite nieces, was touched by his offer of support. "Uncle Charles, are you sure? I don't want to cause more family drama." "My dear girl, sometimes causing a little drama is exactly what this family needs. Besides, your mother has already indicated she supports a more inclusive approach to these celebrations." Princess Anne's backing of her brother's inclusive approach surprised many palace watchers. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and traditional values, and had initially been skeptical of Charles's public confrontation with palace protocol. But she had come to understand that her brother's fight was about more than just his stepchildren. It was about the future flexibility of the entire royal family. The planning of Zara's wedding became a laboratory for testing new approaches to royal inclusion. Mike Tyndall's family and friends were welcomed without question. Extended family members who had previously been relegated to evening receptions were invited to the full ceremony. Most significantly, Tom and Laura Parker Bowles were included not just as guests, but as members of the wedding party itself. The symbolic importance of this inclusion wasn't lost on anyone involved. Here was a royal wedding where Charles's stepchildren would play visible, official roles in the celebration. It was exactly the kind of recognition that had been denied to them at Charles and Camilla's own wedding. But the palace establishment wasn't ready to surrender without a fight. Sir Robin Janvrin, still serving as the Queen's private secretary, raised concerns about the precedent being set by Zara's wedding plans. "Your Majesty, if we allow unlimited inclusion at royal weddings, we risk losing control over the message these events send about the monarchy," he warned during a private briefing. The Queen's response surprised him. "Robin, perhaps it's time we trusted the judgment of our family members about who they want to celebrate with. They haven't led us astray yet." This shift in the Queen's thinking reflected months of private conversations with Prince Philip, who had become increasingly supportive of Charles's modernization efforts. Philip had seen enough of Tom and Laura Parker Bowles to judge their character personally, and he had concluded that Charles was right about their worthiness for inclusion in royal life. "They're sensible young people who understand their responsibilities," Philip told his wife during one of their private walks through the Balmoral grounds. "Charles isn't asking us to make them working royals or give them titles. He just wants them treated as family members, which is what they are." The preparation for Zara's wedding also provided an opportunity for Tom and Laura to demonstrate their understanding of royal protocol and their comfort with increased visibility. Both handled the additional media attention with grace, giving brief but appropriate interviews that emphasized their happiness for Zara and Mike while carefully avoiding any controversial topics. Tom's approach was particularly impressive. When asked by a journalist about his role in the royal family, he replied with exactly the kind of diplomatic answer that palace media trainers would have recommended. "I'm simply grateful to be part of such a wonderful extended family, and I'm honored to celebrate Zara and Mike's happiness." Laura showed similar poise when discussing her children's relationship with their royal step-cousins. "The children just see each other as family," she said simply. "They play together, they laugh together, and they support each other. That's what families do." These interactions helped convince palace officials that Tom and Laura could indeed be trusted with greater inclusion in royal life. They demonstrated the discretion and media awareness that were essential for anyone connected to the monarchy, while maintaining the authenticity and warmth that had originally attracted Charles to them as family members. The royal wedding itself, held at Canongate Kirk in Edinburgh, became a celebration of the new inclusive approach that Charles had been advocating. The guest list included everyone from rugby teammates to royal cousins, creating exactly the kind of warm, family-oriented celebration that Charles believed royal weddings should be. Tom and Laura's presence in the wedding party was noted by media coverage, but rather than creating controversy, it was generally praised as a sign of the royal family's evolution. Editorial writers commented positively on the monarchy's ability to adapt to modern family structures while maintaining its essential dignity. Most importantly for Charles, the wedding demonstrated that inclusion could be achieved without chaos. The ceremony was beautiful, dignified, and properly royal, while also being genuinely warm and family-oriented. It proved that his vision of modernized royal celebrations was not only possible, but potentially superior to the rigid traditions they were replacing. The success of Zara's wedding emboldened Charles to push for even more significant changes in royal protocol. He began advocating for Tom and Laura's inclusion in the annual Christmas gathering at Sandringham, one of the most private and traditional royal celebrations. This proposal met with more resistance than previous requests, as Christmas at Sandringham was considered the ultimate expression of royal family intimacy. Including non-royal family members would represent a fundamental shift in how the monarchy understood itself and its boundaries. The debate over Christmas invitations raged privately throughout the autumn of 2007, with various family members weighing in on both sides. Prince Andrew supported his brother's position, arguing that his own daughters deserved to have their future step-families welcomed as warmly as possible. Prince Edward was more cautious, worried about the precedent being set for his own children's eventual marriages. The resolution came through an unexpected alliance between the Queen Mother's legacy and Charles's modernization efforts. While going through some of her late mother's papers, the Queen discovered notes from the 1950s discussing the inclusion of various non-royal family members in Christmas celebrations. It turned out that the tradition of limiting Christmas to immediate royals was actually a relatively recent development, not an ancient custom. Armed with this historical evidence, Charles made his most persuasive argument yet for including Tom and Laura in Christmas celebrations. "Mama, we're not breaking with tradition," he argued. "We're returning to a more inclusive tradition that Granny understood intuitively." The Queen's agreement to include Tom and Laura in the 2007 Christmas celebrations at Sandringham represented the culmination of Charles's 2-year campaign for their recognition. It was a private victory that would have enormous symbolic significance for the future direction of the royal family. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of this victory was how naturally it felt once it was achieved. Tom and Laura fit seamlessly into the Christmas celebrations, participating in the traditional walks, gift exchanges, and family conversations that define the holiday for the royal family. Prince Philip, who had initially been skeptical of including non-royal family members in such intimate celebrations, found himself genuinely enjoying Tom's company during their discussions of military history and sustainable agriculture. The Queen discovered that Laura's children brought exactly the kind of youthful energy that had been missing from recent Christmas gatherings. Most importantly for Charles and Camilla, the inclusion of her children in Christmas celebrations felt like the final acceptance of their blended family by the monarchy itself. They had fought for this recognition for over 2 years, and its achievement felt like validation not just of Tom and Laura's worthiness, but of their entire approach to modernizing royal family traditions. As 2007 drew to a close, Charles could reflect on a remarkable transformation in his family's situation. What had begun as a painful exclusion from his wedding had evolved into a comprehensive victory for inclusive royal practices. Tom and Laura were now fully integrated into royal family life, participating in celebrations, supporting charitable causes, and contributing their own unique perspectives to the monarchy's evolution. The silence that had followed their initial rejection had indeed changed the palace forever, but not in the way that palace traditionalists had feared. Rather than undermining royal dignity, the inclusion of Charles's stepchildren had demonstrated that the monarchy could evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character and values. The rebellion was complete, and its success would pave the way for even more significant changes in the years to come. By the spring of 2010, 5 years after Charles and Camilla's wedding, the transformation of the royal family was complete in ways that no one could have anticipated. What had begun as a bitter dispute over wedding guest lists had evolved into a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be part of the modern British monarchy. The changes were visible everywhere, from the relaxed atmosphere at royal gatherings to the genuine warmth in family photographs that now regularly included Tom and Laura Parker Bowles alongside their royal step-siblings. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Charles himself, who had emerged from his battle with palace protocol as a more confident and decisive heir to the throne. Prince William, now 27 and preparing for his own wedding to Catherine Middleton, sought his father's advice on navigating the complex dynamics of royal marriage and family integration. The conversation took place during one of their regular walks through the gardens at Highgrove, a tradition that had brought father and son closer together over the years. "Pa," William said as they paused beside the organic vegetable garden that Charles had cultivated with such passion, "I've been thinking about what you went through with Tom and Laura, and I want to make sure I handle things better when Catherine and I marry." Charles looked at his eldest son with pride and affection. "What do you mean, better? You don't have the same challenges that we faced." "I mean the Middleton family," William explained. "I want them to feel completely welcome and included from the beginning. I don't want Catherine to go through what Camilla experienced with her children being excluded from important events." This conversation reflected the profound impact that Charles's struggle for family inclusion had made on the next generation of royals. William had witnessed firsthand the pain that exclusion could cause, and he was determined to avoid similar conflicts when he married. Charles was deeply moved by his son's consideration for his future in-laws. "William, the fact that you're thinking about this now shows exactly the kind of king you're going to be. The monarchy's strength has always come from its ability to bring families together, not drive them apart." The planning for William and Catherine's wedding became an opportunity to demonstrate just how much royal attitudes toward family inclusion had evolved. The Middleton family was not just invited to participate in all aspects of the celebration, but was actively courted and supported by palace staff who had learned valuable lessons from the challenges surrounding Charles and Camilla's marriage. Carol and Michael Middleton were given extensive briefings on royal protocol and were included in planning discussions that previous generations of royal in-laws would never have accessed. Catherine's siblings, Pippa and James, were given significant roles in the wedding ceremony, with Pippa serving as maid of honor in a way that emphasized the importance of family bonds over royal hierarchy. But it was Charles who ensured that the wedding truly reflected the inclusive values he had fought to establish. During a private conversation with Catherine, he offered advice that came directly from his experiences with Camilla's integration into royal life. "Catherine," he said during one of their quiet conversations at Clarence House, "the most important thing is to remember that you're not just joining the royal family. You're helping us become a better family. Don't ever let anyone make you feel that your background or your family is somehow inadequate." Catherine was touched by her future father-in-law's support, but she was also curious about the struggles he had faced. "Sir, William has told me about some of the difficulties you experienced when you married Camilla. How did you find the strength to keep fighting?" Charles's answer came from deep reflection on the transformative years he had experienced. "I learned that being true to your family and your values is more important than maintaining traditions that don't serve anyone well. The monarchy's job is to support strong families, not to tear them apart for the sake of protocol." This philosophy guided every aspect of William and Catherine's wedding planning. When questions arose about including distant Middleton relatives or family friends, the default answer was inclusion rather than exclusion. When media coverage focused on the contrast between royal grandeur and middle-class backgrounds, palace officials actively emphasized the positive aspects of this diversity. The wedding day itself, April 29th, 2011, became a celebration of everything Charles had fought to achieve. The ceremony was magnificently royal while also being genuinely inclusive. The Middleton family participated with grace and confidence, demonstrating exactly the kind of successful integration that Charles had envisioned for his own stepchildren. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles attended the wedding as valued family members, their presence now so natural and accepted that media coverage barely mentioned their inclusion. They sat with other members of Charles and Camilla's extended family, participating in a celebration that would have been unimaginable during the rigid protocol discussions of 2005. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during the wedding reception at Buckingham Palace, when the Queen herself approached Tom and Laura to thank them for their contributions to the family's happiness over the years. "I want you both to know," she said in a private moment that was observed by several family members, "that you have brought great joy to Charles and Camilla, and, through them, to all of us. You are valued members of this family." This acknowledgement from the Queen represented the complete victory of Charles's campaign for family inclusion. The monarch, who had initially resisted the integration of his stepchildren, was now personally thanking them for their positive impact on royal family life. The success of William and Catherine's wedding validated every argument Charles had made about the benefits of inclusive royal celebrations. The event was praised globally for its combination of traditional magnificence and modern family warmth. Editorial coverage consistently noted how the royal family's evolution toward greater inclusivity had enhanced rather than diminished its appeal to contemporary audiences. But the real test of the new royal approach came in the months following the wedding, as Catherine began her integration into royal duties and family traditions. Here, the lessons learned from Camilla's experience proved invaluable in creating a smoother transition for the new Duchess of Cambridge. Palace officials who had once fought to exclude Charles's stepchildren now worked actively to include Catherine's family in appropriate royal events. The Middletons were invited to join royal gatherings at Balmoral and Sandringham, participating in the private family traditions that had once been jealously guarded against outside influence. James Middleton's struggles with dyslexia became an opportunity for royal advocacy rather than a source of embarrassment. The family's business background was celebrated as bringing real-world experience to royal charity work rather than being seen as somehow inappropriate for royal connections. Most significantly, Pippa Middleton's prominent role at the royal wedding and her subsequent high-profile social life was managed with the kind of sophisticated media strategy that might have prevented many of the difficulties that had surrounded Camilla's integration into royal life. Charles watched these developments with deep satisfaction, understanding that his struggle for family inclusion had paved the way for a more successful integration of future royal spouses and their families. The battles he had fought with palace protocol were now bearing fruit in the smoother experiences of the next generation. The transformation was perhaps most visible during the 2012 Diamond Jubilee celebrations, marking the Queen's 60 years on the throne. The extended royal family gathered for these historic celebrations included not just Tom and Laura Parker Bowles, but also the Middleton family, various royal cousins and their spouses, and a range of other family connections that reflected the monarchy's evolution toward greater inclusivity. Prince Philip, now 91 and increasingly reflective about his decades of royal service, offered his perspective on the changes during a quiet moment with Charles at the Diamond Jubilee garden party. "You know, Charles," he said as they watched the diverse gathering of family members mingling with guests from across the Commonwealth, "I think you were right about all this inclusion business. Look at how natural it all seems now." Charles followed his father's gaze across the garden, seeing Tom deep in conversation with a Commonwealth Prime Minister about sustainable agriculture, Laura chatting easily with Catherine about family life, and various other non-royal family members contributing their own perspectives to the celebration. It just needed someone to push for it, Papa. Once people saw that inclusion could work, it became natural. The Queen herself acknowledged the transformation during her Diamond Jubilee speech to Parliament, though her reference was subtle enough that only family members would recognize its significance. "The strength of our monarchy has always come from its ability to adapt while maintaining its essential character," she said. "We have learned that growing to accommodate new family members and new perspectives does not weaken our traditions, but enriches them." Those words represented a complete reversal from the Queen's initial position on including Charles's stepchildren in royal life. The monarch, who had once worried that inclusion would undermine royal dignity, was now celebrating it as a source of strength. But Perhaps the most lasting impact of Charles's campaign for family inclusion became apparent in 2013, when Prince Harry began his serious relationship with Meghan Markle. The lessons learned from integrating both Camilla's children and Catherine's family into royal life provided a template for welcoming Meghan's diverse background and complex family situation. Harry himself credited his father's example when explaining his approach to protecting and supporting Meghan during their courtship. "Pa showed me that you have to fight for the people you love," Harry told friends. "You can't just hope that the palace will eventually come around. Sometimes you have to make them come around." This philosophy guided Harry and Meghan's early relationship with the royal family, as palace officials worked to avoid repeating the exclusions and difficulties that had characterized earlier royal romances. While new challenges would emerge, the basic framework of inclusion and family support that Charles had established provided a foundation for navigating them. The culmination of this evolution came in 2018, during Harry and Meghan's wedding at Windsor Castle. The ceremony celebrated diversity and inclusion in ways that would have been unimaginable during the rigid protocol discussions of the mid-2000s. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, was welcomed and supported with the kind of warmth that Charles had always wanted for his own stepchildren. As Charles watched Harry and Meghan exchange vows, surrounded by family members from across the spectrum of backgrounds and experiences, he reflected on the long journey that had brought the royal family to this point. The painful exclusion of Tom and Laura from his own wedding had catalyzed changes that were now benefiting his sons and their families. Tom and Laura themselves had evolved into valued senior members of the extended royal family, contributing their expertise to various charitable causes while maintaining the discretion and dignity that had always characterized their approach to royal connections. Their children were growing up with close relationships to their royal cousins, creating bonds that would strengthen the family for generations to come. The success of their integration had also influenced other royal families across Europe, as monarchies everywhere grappled with questions of tradition, inclusion, and modernization. Charles's example had shown that royal families could evolve without losing their essential character, providing a model for constitutional monarchies facing similar challenges. As the 2010s drew to a close, Charles could look back on his campaign for family inclusion as one of the defining achievements of his time as heir to the throne. The quiet revolution he had sparked by refusing to accept his stepchildren's exclusion had transformed not just his own family situation, but the entire approach of the British monarchy to questions of belonging and acceptance. The silence that had followed the initial rejection of Tom and Laura from the royal wedding had indeed changed the palace forever. But rather than the constitutional crisis that some had feared, it had produced a stronger, more inclusive, and more genuinely family-oriented monarchy that was better equipped to serve contemporary British society. When Charles eventually became king, he would inherit a throne that had already been transformed by his struggles as heir. The monarchy he would lead would be one that understood the importance of family inclusion, that celebrated diversity while maintaining tradition, and that had learned to adapt and grow while preserving its essential dignity and purpose. The legacy of that difficult period in 2005, when his stepchildren were excluded from his wedding, would be a royal family that never again allowed protocol to triumph over family love, and never again forced its members to choose between duty and the people they held dear. It was a revolution that had begun in silence, but had ultimately transformed everything, creating a new model of royal family life that would serve the monarchy well for generations to come. The boy who had once been excluded from royal celebrations would grow up in a family that understood the paramount importance of inclusion, acceptance, and love over rigid adherence to outdated traditions. And in that transformation, perhaps, lay the true measure of Charles's contribution to the evolution of the British monarchy, not in grand gestures or dramatic reforms, but in the quiet insistence that family should always come first, and that love should always triumph over protocol.